So yeah, I want to develop a style, a build to be exact, and you're kind of curious on how, someone like me, I can make my builds look unique yet the same. That's something you may hear a lot. So people do ask me, like, how do I come up with my own personal style and stuff, and things like that. But I'm just gonna straight up tell you that this sort of thing, it takes lots of practice, it takes a lot of trial and error, and really depends on what you really like as a builder yourself. So I've like trialed things, like for example, like my builds are way more defined in how they are structured. There isn't that many more organic shapes in the buildings themselves, more so just the landscapes. As I kind of like the juxtaposition of, a very naturalistic terrain versus a very fantasy styled build. And I mean, people like the vice versa of that. So it just comes down to personal preference. Like building in general and design and art is just all basically preference based. And as an artist, you should feel proud in what you create and not really build for others. And that way you're going to enjoy the craft more, even if you don't get as many compliments on the builds themselves. So, I hate to break it, but this sort of stuff can take years, like at least months to years to develop. I mean, I've been playing the game for almost 10 years now of the recording of this, and yeah, I'm still developing my style further and further. So, something I love in builds is playing with colour. So, I'm going to roll into one of my builds. So starting off, the first example build of the day, I'm going to show you my Bradwick manor of my survival, survival base project mega base. Sort of Victorian, Gothic, kind of steampunky inspired somehow, is that I'm using a lot of autumn/fall colours, right? And I'm being very consistent in this build, and I've been very strict on myself to not use any greens in the build. I use more solid walls than I do gradients or textures. So on the manor here, is you see I've used bricks, right? And I've used polished granite, and what I've done is I've just made it more defined on where the things are. So it's like something that I could do, for example, but choose not to, is I could mix in terracotta with the bricks as a texture. And now it can work fine, but I'm not the biggest fan of how it looks on sort of my builds. So some people may call me lazy or dislike that, but that's just the way that I build. I don't really over texture. Like I said, my builds are way more defined, and that's a key characteristic of my style. Even if I go to something like this modern house which I made up, I was a bit bored one day, so I was just playing around with exterior shapes. But like I said, this build is very, for a modern build, it should probably already be pretty defined with sleek edges and cubist sort of design. And this is another characteristic which I do a lot in my builds, is I have a lot of what I call kind of builderbrad Ivy trademark. It's not trademark, you don't have to worry about using it. It's totally fine to steal my ideas. But something I like to do is I like to diversify my vegetation using a lot of woods, like diversed into the build itself. So something I like to do is I like to use like gates, fences, signs, things of that nature to make the ivy look a bit like more I don't know what the word is, but more wooded maybe. But this is something I also do in my custom tree work, is I always sort of I love putting in stuff like this. I mean, here's a trick for you. You can use a button, as long as you can like have access to world edit or something to change block, you can You can have it so the leaf, the button comes off the leaf, because normally you can't place them on transparent block. Headed back to where I started off this video is sort of this building here, which I really could not tell you, even as an architecture student, what style this is in. But this is sort of a build I half kind of did, because I was a bit bored and I wanted to do something a bit... Well, this in truth was meant to be the Bradwick Manor I showed off earlier, but it was way too big for my custom island in survival. I don't know if I will ever finish this build, but this has some stuff which I don't normally do in my builds. The best example is I've mixed in polished granite and terracotta with bricks, and I'm not a big fan of that, honestly. You may love it, but I personally don't like it. But something I like to do in my builds is I like to have a lot of, like my traditional builds for the series, I like to have a lot of spikes is what I'm going to call it. I like to use various colours. Again, you can see sort of the builderbrad. I've not really had the patience to add the gates and fences into there, but I maybe will if I go back to this build. But I built this before copper, I think, was even announced, right? And I've sort of done this block gradient with world edit, and I think it looks really good. Even better than actual copper blocks for some reason, because you can really get a blue tone, whilst the oxidized copper is more of a greenish. A lot of my builds are on the grander scale. Like, you won't see me making like a 2-block height ceiling ever. It will always be like 5 or 7 or just 20. It's just, I build a lot grander in my sort of build scheme. And maybe that's something you don't do. Maybe you love building 3x3x3 interiors, you know? Whereas this interior, if I ever did it, would be absolutely humongous. Speaking of interior, as you can see, I've sort of, like, I've have quite a few of the walls detailed with various blocks, but again, it's very defined. This house is a rectangle, in truth. It is a rectangle with a curved staircase, a bit of a storage place, and I wanted to use copper, but it wasn't out yet, so I've used red sandstone, and I've just used copper as an accent colour. But an accent colour I've been using in interiors is this crimson wood. I love the way that this looks for interiors. I just absolutely love it. Don't mind the water dripping. But yeah, you can say that my interiors are rather posh. They're rather fancy. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 blocks tall. Like, this isn't what you make for a starter build. But yeah, I build more grand, but they're still to player scale, is something I want to note. So maybe you want to build massive, huge structures like this for giants, whilst normally I just want to build stuff more this scale, where yes, it's sort of very big compared to player, but it's still, you know, livable. Rising up to the bedroom here, well, the upstairs, is I've used some more crimson. I've been using a crimson motif for the furniture pieces, as if, you know, maybe there's an industry for crimson logs or something. Maybe it's just painted wood. I always thought it kind of looks more like painted wood than anything else. Like, I also think warp is a really good interior block as well for this sort of feel. Like, you could easily make this, like, you could easily mix them together or just have them separate or something like that. Like, either way, I just think it looks like a sort of Victorian era sort of interior. So here's the master bedroom, and again, everything is very grand, but kind of still to player scale. This bed is 4 blocks long, and something I use a lot, you will notice, is trapdoors. I always use these partial blocks in my sort of builds. This is just a wardrobe here. And yeah, it's a bathroom. And I've done something very interesting in this, is for one, I like to do these chandelier designs with the grindstones, anvils. You may like smaller ones, but because I have the space, like a lot of my builds, like I said, are very grand. And that's something you may want to keep in mind. Maybe you want to be really like less grand in your personal style. This is a half kind of, I mean, it's more like 90% finished library build for my villager trading hall, which I'm working on. And yeah, so I still have a ways to go with this, but you can kind of see that it's sort of encompassing my style, of course. So I've used the yellow and the oranges, so that's blending it back into the colour palette, the warm red bricks, so this is in keeping with the rest of the build itself, really. I made it kind of different with having a gradient of bone to a smooth quartz to wool, and I quite like the gradient as it goes from a sort of a off-white to a white, and it's quite different in the fact that it's like one of the only buildings so far which uses white as the predominant colour in the whole build. Of course, it still has the bricks. Something I love to do in my builds is I like to use signs a lot, and trapdoors, which I mentioned. I love using my partial blocks, and that might be a big giveaway to if a build was made by me. So I've used acacia as not only an accent colour, but as a copper motif. I mean, we don't really have like copper fences or copper, I mean we do have copper blocks, but not copper walls or trapdoors. I've used acacia for that sort of effect. So if we actually head in, like at the front door, you can see that I've enlarged the door, but it's still kind of within player scale. But I've done this arch using partial blocks. You might not like partial blocks, you might just want to leave it like that, but to me, I really like using partial blocks and getting things as sort of smooth as possible, really. So this is the interior of the build, and you can kind of see that, again, my build sort of style is grand. It is very grand, it's very defined, it's very fancy. So you can see that I've used like soil, I've used a trim on the ceiling, you can see that the floor is like this lovely tile, which I'm imagining. And you can just sort of see all the copper, and I've even hid sea lanterns behind this so that it's actually quite lit up. I mean, obviously it's already mob proofed because of all the slabs and stuff, but it just looks better if you, like, it just looks better at night and stuff by the fact that I have hidden lights everywhere, which is also a benefit of having this more three-dimensional wall. I like, in my style, I like to have things more three-dimensional. I play around with depth a lot. So, ceiling has depth. This staircase, which took me an hour to get the curve right, has quite a bit of depth. But I've also, you know, looked at an enchantment table, and I love using banners as little pillows here, and looms as empty bookshelves, which I've seen a lot of other people do. And like, that's just something part of my interior style, is I like to just, like, I like to detail a lot, is maybe the word. I like to throw in stuff. So over here, we under the stairs, this is where my like two curse guys would be. If eventually, when I do have this set up as villager trading hall, and this curved, brilliantly curved staircase which I've designed with the chandelier, which again took an hour to design, but I think it looks really good. Again, it leads into the fact that I build very grand, and that's sort of part of my style, and that copper motif again of this chandelier. Something I do a lot is fancy chandeliers, and again, the spikes. I've been doing spikes for a while, and a lot of my builds do have spikes. Like you can see at the top of here, we have the spikes all over the entire build, because I just like the way that they look. They look kind of fantasy-like. Again, the throw pillows, the crimson. all the bookshelves. Again, this isn't 100% done, but I really like the way that this is turning out, and even the ceiling. Take away a lot from this build is that it also has some practicality in it. These villagers can't move because there's walls here, and they can't pathfind off it, and zombies can't pathfind onto this carpet to get to these villagers, which is also great if you want to design with purpose as well, which I'm sure a lot of you don't really care about, but some of you may care about survivability with builds. I know I do. But yeah, again, it has a lot of spikes. It has a lot of trapdoors. Maybe you dislike the trapdoors, and that's completely fine. Like, I use every partial block I can use to develop a better shape, and maybe you just want to use full blocks for your towers. That's completely fine. Like, I've used many like windows and stuff in this circular thing using trapdoors and stairs. I've used quite a lot of arches. I do these things loads in my less modern build. And something else I do in my style is I use a lot of, you know, these sort of windows which are circular. You see the spikes again, you see how defined my builds are, you see that this seal, I don't know what you would call it, I think it's called a freeze between the roof and the walls, but you can see that I used gold block, and then it goes into this red sandstone like spire, which is honestly a really nice shape in my opinion. I really like the way that that turned out, and you can kind of just see that like everything again is kept within the same colour palette. It's like warmer tones all throughout. I just like what I like in what I build, and that's kind of the way that you should build as well. You should just enjoy kind of what you're making and just play around with things. Like this mansion, for example, although it's still being worked on, the towers and things like that, it's still being worked. I'm going to show a screenshot. I wanted this build to be taller, of all things. It's quite far from height limit, and it's really far from 1.18 height limit, but I just chose not to hit that height limit because it would look ridiculously tall for the mansion itself, and that's something you kind of need to weigh in when you're building. Maybe you think one way, but you have to change your opinion on it because it might just cost the cosmetics of your build. If I made this to world height, it would just look like a skyscraper more than a mansion, and it already, you know, looks rather like slender and tall around. Maybe you try something and you absolutely love it, love the way that looks, and then you develop that into future builds. It's like, I love using spikes now. I didn't always use, you know, I don't know if there's a better way, but I've never always used, you know, spikes in a build. I also, another characteristic of my builds is angles. I've been playing around with angles a lot more than I used to. So this is on an angle, this is on an angle, these bits are on angles, these are circular. Again, going back to the circle designs, and I've used so many trapdoors here. I'm gonna kill myself for designing this like this when I do this roof in survival, but I've used so many trapdoors to get the shape right, to really just angle it well. And again, the circles and the spikes, you can just see how parts of my style and parts of just features which I like in a build are being used. I like to keep things the same but kind of different. Like these circles here are different to these circles here, and the way that they are is these ones are on a 90-degree angle for one, but they also have gold blocks behind them and a clock, because clock towers, I mean, it really fits in well with the theming, you know, which also is quite different from this area here, which has a circular. My biggest takeaway from this video is that it's okay if you don't know your style straight away. Like I said, it might take months, it could take years. I'm still developing mine. But something I just want to say is that it, like, not only is it okay that you don't know your style and that maybe you follow tutorials and stuff like that. I personally don't ever follow tutorials unless they're redstone, as that's not really cosmetic. But if you follow build tutorials to get better and to get the feel and wonder why a builder's done something in their style, that's fine. But my biggest takeaway is just play around with the shape and form of your builds. Maybe you hate the way that I build in the way that things are more structured. Maybe you want to make a mushroom house, more organics, and that's really good. Like, if you want to, mix in polished granite and terracotta into these brick walls, if you did something like this, that's completely fine. Building is subjective at the end of the day. I may not like it, but you may love the way that it looks. You may hate working on angles at all costs, whilst I've sort of embraced it for some aspects of my builds. I've sort of added in some human aspects to my build. Like this, I plan to here to have an open window, so I could electrify into the bedroom, which I plan to have under the skylight. It's just some neat details like that, which really can define your building. But yeah, just building with personality or building without luck, you can do whatever you want, and I might be waffling on about stuff here. So if you've enjoyed this on how to develop your style, is just play around. Just if you hate doing a roof or something, or anything really, just maybe don't try it. Maybe that's part of your style. Maybe you hate doing gabled roofs, so you never make them, and that could be a key characteristic of your builds. So yeah, this has been builderbrad, and I hope you've understood and enjoyed this video on how to sort of develop a style and build on it.